Hi, welcome to Sonic Peak Studio. My name is Jakob, and in today's Behind the Mix video, we'll be looking at Alice Bowles' song called Tableau from his video about Teisco synthesizers. Features the very nice Teisco SX400, vocals, acoustic drums, mixed in with some samples, and right now we're listening to the last verse. Now, before we really can dive into some details about how this was constructed, I think it's a good thing to have a look at the return channel and the mastering channel first, because they play a big part, especially the return channels play a big part of the sound of this mix. And regarding the mastering channel, well, most of it will be going through it anyways. As an added bonus, below I have added links to a sample pack of these drums, in which the whole performances of them are soloed to give you as many articulations as possible, and both dry and wet. But as I said before, the reverb on the snare is a big part of the sound, but now you have the choice. So without further ado, let's dive into the returns and the mastering channel. Here we are, looking at the mastering channel. Before I go on, I'd like to say that most of these plugins do not come on the mastering channel before very late in the project. Of course, my monitoring / room correction plugin is there all the time, not on now for the purpose of this video, and my metering plugins are on, but then I do have the console 1 usually with a slight low cut at around 30, and then I do have the L2 here, but as usually turned off. I only turn on the L2 to make a quick mix down to check in the car or at work or something like that. The rest, linear multiband compressor, vitamin, and all this stuff comes on later normally, but let's have a look at it. So first of all, as I already said, I have a slight low cut here at 30, and it also gives me a nice hardware feedback on the Console 1 Mark II remote controller, so that's also why I have it there. Now, the linear phase multiband compressor is really nice to paint with a broad brush. We can have a look at that now, and let's see how it sounds. Here we go. Now the drums are soloed, just unsolo those. Let's try and turn off the linear mode. So it gets a little bit more undefined and a little bit more muddy. And here it is again, back on, a little bit more out of the speakers, so to say. And the same thing goes for the Vitamin plugin here. This is a very nice harmonic exciter that also has a bit of spread on each band on. And here you can see I've given all of the master a little bit of juice, and I think it works really nice. And you'll also see it later used on the snare and here and there to really try and emphasize the harmonics that are going on in a given signal. Let's have a look and listen. With, without. With. It's a little subtle, but it brings a little bit more out the speakers, right? And if we disable both the linear multiband and the Vitamin, let's see what happens. So this is basically what I've been listening to while I was mixing. Let's have a look at the return channels. It will also give a glimpse into my standard mix setup that I use, more or less. Of course, it's tweaked along the way as the music happens. First up, I have a SSL bus compressor. I really on some projects like to send off softer elements to this. It will really enhance the tails of them, but in this project I didn't think that was needed, so it's basically not used. Now, return B, I have this very lovely Juno style chorus from Tel. It is free and I really urge you to get it. It sounds really good. It's set to full blast, but in front of it is a low cut because I don't want to modulate the low end too much, and that will also let me send bass to it and stuff like that. And I think we should have a listen on the pad here, the Polysynth in the verse, on how it works with it. Let's have a listen with that and without. With, off, with, without, with. So of course it gets louder because there's lots of it, but it also gets spread out and widened quite a bit, which is great. There's also a bit of the chorus on the bass itself. We can try and have a listen to the chorus in solo. Now, I know there's also a bit of the next one, doubler on the bass. So we can't quite make a solo without also turning this one off. Let's do that, and let's come to that later. Let's have a listen to the chorus on and off, because the bass is also sent to it. On, off. So it widens it a bit and makes it a little bit more swirly, interesting. And then when the solo stuff comes in the middle, they really blend nicely together, I think. So that's the Tel chorus. Let's leave that on. Next up is the Waves doubler. Now this is actually a kind of a static chorus, and I've modified a couple of presets. When you have it on a send return, you disable the direct signal, of course. And then same deal here. I'm cutting the low frequencies before it because I don't want it to modulate those. What this one does is takes in the signal and detunes it and then spread it. So it's a kind of a static chorus. Let's have a listen to it with it and without it. With, without, still without, with. Let's have a listen to that in solo. So here we have a good deal of the bass in it, and also that same solo synth. Pad, and then comes the solo synth. Let's try and turn off the chorus and the doubler. So those two alone they give quite a bit to the width. And on again. And they also, of course, play a big part in the ending. There's also chorus and doubler on the bass and stuff like that in the ending. And without those, it just wouldn't really work. Let's try have a listen. It's clear without, right? Beneath them again. There we go. So that just about covers the chorus and the doubler. Next up is really the elephant in the room, or in the gated room, because it's so prevalent. And that's the gated room, of course, on the snare. What I've used here is a convolution reverb, which is based on an AMS reverb, and it's on its non-linear 0.7 second preset. It's basically the Prince preset, and then a bit of EQing going on it. So a low cut, and then scooping a bit of the 1K out, and then let it ring. Else there is not much to it. But it actually goes in hand with the room that's here. It's a slightly longer one. And also, it sounds as if it's stretching the end of the gated one. So these two work in conjunction with each other. So in order to investigate them, we need to hear them, with and without. So let's do that. With, of course. Without. Here comes the gate. And the room. So the gated room sort of gives the first initial right after the snare, and then the room return here sort of just takes that and adds a tail to it. So that's how those two guys are used. It's used on a bit of the elements here as well to try and make it sound as if they're in the same room, yet not yet controlled. And I think we managed to do that. Let's have another listen. It's... only room. Nothing. Only the gated room. And then both of them. They are also both really important in the ending, even though it's large and huge. And we have another drum layer going here. You can see I had to make duplicates of the drums because these two parts of the song are so different, and then everything changes from here. But these two smaller reverbs are still very important in the ending. Let's have a listen. Let's try and mute them. Listen to the snare. Off. On. So it gives this pistol shot in the background, right? Without. So that's how those work. And then speaking of the ending, we have long reverb here, which is used on pads and some of the vocals as well. I'm a big fan of Valhalla Vintage Verb, as you might have guessed. And then we have a longer room here, which is a lexicon impulse response loaded into CR2. And then from there on, that just about covers the return channels. Let's get into some track details. Now, usually when I receive a new project from an artist, I do all the usual stuff of coloring and getting it all organized. But then I go through all the tracks with a parametric equalizer, and I find the stuff that I like, and then I find the stuff that I don't like. And I usually have a reference track from the artist that I can listen to, so I know where we're going. But I listen to all the tracks on solo, and much of this stuff is blatantly obvious that it's not nice to listen to when you just turn up the volume a little bit. So I go through all the tracks and I find the stuff that I don't like, and then I mark it with an equalizer. In those cases where I'm in doubt, I'll just make a very, very slight cut like this. Or even if I can hear that, I'll just make sure that that frequency is set to the right place, so that later when I return to the project, to the track in the project, and if I need some more crack, I can just turn the gain up, and if I need less, I can do like this, and I don't have to then go hunting for frequencies while in a creative process. So this gives for a very nice workflow, I think. Now I have the drums here. They are, most of them are bussed here in a group. I have the cymbals in a group separately, because I don't like compression and limiting and stuff like that on cymbals, not too much anyway. They will also anyway receive limiting on the mastering channel. It can sometimes be nice, but generally I don't like it. I think it makes for much freer sounding, open sounding cymbals. So here I have the drums. We can have a listen to those. And here we have the kick. So what's going on here? First we have a gate here, and when we look at that, it's actually also tuned to frequencies, so only react to anything below 200. We can try and disengage it. It takes a lot of rumble away and makes it much more tight. There we go. Then we have console 1, and it has a transient shaper / gate in it, and right now I'm using it as a transient shaper, so I put a lot of punch in it. We can try and have a listen to that. And disabled. Then next we have the EQ. It might look very drastic, but don't be shocked. I'm not shy to use a lot of EQ, and it might seem as if Jonathan has supplied a lot of bad recordings, but he has not. They're actually very good. It's just that in this instance, I thought that a more artificial sounding drum sound would fit the song better. So I turned the knobs until I got what I wanted. Right. So and basically this hole here is made to make room for the bass in many ways, and also the bottom of the vocals. We can have a listen. Listen how cloudy it gets. And if you take this, there's a reason why that's taken out, right? So let's put that back. There we go. Okay. So, and then we have the compressor, and what's to notice here is that what I've done is I've tried to hunt for the absolute best sounding snap that I could with infinite ratio, the shortest amount of release, but then I've dialed in the dry signal here as a parallel compression as to make it up to get that balance. And I've done that on the snare top as well, as we'll see later, I think. So if we take out the compressor, we can tune the parallel without, with wet, right? And then the dry signal. Listen how the low end comes back. And then it becomes a balance between the click, the snappiness, and the low end. But there's a way to control that as well, to fine tune that as well, as you'll see later. I actually didn't think that all of the mud got cleaned up by my SSL 4000 strip here. So I also used a Nova, which is a dynamic EQ, but I also use some static settings on it. You can actually rather drastic. We can try and take that one out and listen to the cloudiness coming back. And I couldn't get that quite hollow sound on the SSL strip because there's no more gain in it. It makes for a much more punchy and open sound, and it makes a really nice hole for the bass to live in. And band 3, why is this here? That's boxiness. I don't like that. It's also cloudy, right? So that's out as well. Now, and here's for controlling the snappiness when you get the right snap and the parallel going, but it's still too snappy. But if you mess with the parallel, you sort of ruin that balance. What do you do then? Well, you put in a limiter. That's what I do here. And this one only shaves off a couple of dBs here and there when Jonathan really steps on it. So this is the final control before it comes into the drums group. Okay. And there's the dry version. Let's move on to the elephant or elephants in the reverb, because there are 3 of them. The snare. There's a snare top track, snare bottom track, snare bottom mic, and then we got a snare layer, which is a sample that's put in. And then of course we have the reverbs, the rooms, and gated reverb going on and all that stuff. So I'm going to turn off the room, because we don't want to have a listen to those to be able to analyze what's going on. So without further ado, let's have a listen. So that's the dry version. Now let's have a look at the snare top. What's going on here? So first off, we have a gate. There's no need to turn that on and off because it's there's a bit of hi-hat bleed and a little bit of kick and stuff like that. No reason to look at that. But the next one is a bit interesting because this is a clipper. And what it does is it shaves off these very fast transients that's coming through here, because I don't want the compressors to react to that. I actually like the distortion that it brings a bit better, and I was about to say, but it doesn't do that quite so nice, but it simulates a kind of a tape effect because it rounds those offs and with a trade-off for distortion. So I like that. And often many of these transients, you can't hear them so well, so there's no reason really to bring them on. So after that we have console 1, and we have that here. First of all, low cut 300, high cut 6. But if you look at the curve, it looks, it goes all the way up to 20 still, because it's not a hard curve, but also boosting above here, and there's a lot of curving going on. So it's not that simple looking at that. After that, I'm using the transient shaper of the plugin, the SSL here, to get some more punch. We can take that out. Without. With, and it brings more into it, so that's nice. Then we have the EQ, of course, and turning that off will, of course, change the result quite a bit. Then the small baby elephant in the room, the compressor here. So I'm doing almost the same as I did on the kick here. So you see infinite ratio, and then I try to find as much smack as absolutely possible in it, and then I parallelized it in back to you know, get a balance between them. Try and take it off. On. So that's very prevalent, right? But it's not enough. And it wasn't in the mix, because after that I have this very nice free compressor called Molot. Actually, TDR, who also makes the TDR Nova and some other splendid plugins, have made a newer version of this, TDR Molot, I think it's called. You should get it. It sounds really great. But I'm still using the old version here. Still free. Really great. Let's try and turn it off. On. So that's smacking really hard, right? So, and that's because the one in the SSL just wasn't enough in the mix. And then you're asking, so did you plan to put, you know, a clipper and 2 compressors and a limiter or whatever on that snap for starters? No, it didn't. You started out with the Console 1, and then you build upon that, listening to it in the mix. And usually tranches are best listened to at low volume. So most of this has been done at very low volumes to get the transients to sit right. At the end, I have a limiter again. And that is really, you know, now found a really nice punch from the transient shaper, the compressor, the SSL, and the Molot compressor, sounding really nice. But then that is a bit too much. And instead of going back and really tweaking those compressors for hours, it's not only easier, but sometimes it actually sounds better to put a limiter in the end, and that's what I've done here. So we can have a look at that. As you can see, it only takes, you know, 3-4 dBs on the hits. Let's try and disable it. You can hear it's more snappy now, right? But that's too snappy for the mix, so we use this instead. Again, stuff like that, adjustments like these, they will have in the mix. You can't do that in solo. And then in the end, we have Vitamin to boost a lot of high end to get that out of the snare. Let's try and disable that. Without. With. So it really brings out the high end, so that's really nice. Okay, so that's the snare top. Here comes the hard part, is of course that this has now a lot of snap. So is that enough? And which part has the best snap? So usually what I do when I get a new project is not only listening for EQing problems at the start, but I also try to identify, in this case, which of these three tracks that had the best snare tracks that had the best snap in them. And actually I found out that they were actually all pretty good. So I tried to balance them up between each other, so as to get a really, you know, nice snappy sound. Good. So that was the snare top. If we look at the snare bottom mic, we can see something funny happening with, if you look at the EQ curve on console 1 for snare bottom now and snare top, you can see what's happening there. That's complementary EQing. So the snare bottom is not filling up the hole that the snare top is doing. On the bottom, I'm really aggressive. Let's have a listen. I'm using the transient shaper in the SSL plugin now to really extend the tails of it. Let's try turn it off. Off. On. Off. Great piece of kit. So let's have a look at the compressor on the snare bottom here. As you can see, I have a rather long attack time, short release, full smack on the ratio, and basically the threshold all the way to the right to give it as much punch as absolutely possible. Let's have a listen with it on and off. On. I don't think I have to say when it's off. So there's that, and then we have the same recipe again. I put in a limiter in the end as to just control it, so I don't really destroy the compression slash low end. Not so much in this signal, but the whole balance of it can be easier controlled by a limiter in the end. It's not doing much. This one actually might be a leftover, but I didn't think that the EQ curve was quite enough, so I also have a Nova going here. The dynamic EQ that I discussed before is really nice again to tame frequencies that are not quite there all the time. So, and this is of course again tuned in the mix towards up against the other snares. Let's have a listen with and without. Out. Without. I'm just taking out a little bit of the last raspiness of it and a little bit of the boxiness that might be left in it, because there's not much room for it when there are three snares on top of each other, right? And then again, we have a vitamin in the end to just give some air to the highs. We can try and disable it. Off. On. So that's pretty obvious as well, what's going on here. And also I'd like to remark that, as you can see, most of the boosts that I'm making, they're all post-limiting, post-compression. I'm not too big of a fan of, boosting frequencies before limiter, because then the limiter or compressor will just, basically work against what I'm doing. So I'd rather have that the boosting thing going on behind the compressor limiter. And here is the snare layer. It's a sample track that was supplied with the project. Let's have a listen to that. And it's a bit like the same story here is going on. I'm using the transient shape of the SSL strip to get as much sustain ring out of the snare as absolutely possible. An EQ curve to make it fit. Then compression again, but this time not so much. Long attack time again to enhance the snap. Short release again, of course, to enhance the tails. And quite a lot of threshold going on. But then it's almost the same story as the snare bottom we saw, but just not so much smack in it, because now we got a lot of smack going in the top and the bottom, so that will just, make it too much and too hard to control. So let's have a listen. Transient shaper off. Let's turn off the compressor. Transient shaper on. So it's really stretching the tails of the signal here. And then let's turn on the compressor. And that one does the final job of, dragging the tail again. And then we have a slight spreader going on, just to make it a little bit wider. And then I have a noder going on also to tame some of the harshness and a little bit of the boxiness that was actually still present in the signal even after this EQ curve. Again, alone it's thin and might be not even pleasant to listen to, but I don't really care for how it sounds alone and in solo. So this was mostly again in the mix. Let's turn off Noah. More boxing. Back on. So let's combine the three snare tracks. Sounds like this. And that was a little bit about the snares and how I sort of got those to work. The reverbs and stuff like that did not really enter the picture until later in the mix. Although when I had to perform the most basic EQing of the tracks and I was trying to get a feel for it, I did try and send something off to my gated reverb to kind of get a feel for if that was indeed the right way to go, and it was, but I had to wait a long time before I really got the gated and the roomy sound that I wanted, because I needed to get this smack in place in combination with each other before I could do that. And when you then introduce the reverbs, now your snaps of the snare start to behave in a different way, and then you have to balance that also. And also, of course, the snares get louder because of the reverb going on, and then you have to balance that. So it's one big soup to try to get this to work. But let's have a listen at the drum bass and solo. As you can hear, the snares a little bit, on the weak side here. Let's bring in the rooms. So, to recap the snare, in a sense it starts out with a nice EQing that removes the stuff that we don't want, combined with transient shapers, compression, and limiting. And what you can take away from this also is that it's not just one magic plugin doing all the work. I'm a much bigger fan of serial compression and limiting, so that each one of those takes care of what they're supposed to take care of a little bit, instead of one limiter or compressor trying to do all of the limiting that you want. With that being said, of course, what we have here is a quite extreme example of transient shaping, compression, and limiting. And what, of course, also goes into it is the EQing and then balancing the three snare tracks with each other to get it to really work. So that was the snares, and I think we should now move on and look a bit at the hi-hats we have here, supplied by Jonathan. And as we can see, we have a gate going here, and then console 1. And what I'm trying to do here is really to exaggerate the off-hat opening that's going on. This one. Okay, not there. Great. And this one, about 5.2, was not nasty, so I had to take that one out, right? Then what's happening is that there was a little bit too much snare going on in the hi-hat track, so I put a compressor on it that was sidechained to snare top. Let's have a disengage of that one. Without sidechain compression. So you can hear the snare there. Okay, let's put it on. And now it's much lower. so as to not interfere too much with the other tracks I have going, really trying to separate them. And then in the end I have a limiter that's really doing something, because I have so many transients going with the kick and the snares that I don't. It would be too busy if the hat was also going with hard transients. So I put a lot of limiting on that one. Also, it let me stretch out the aux-hat here that I really liked. Let's have a listen. Try and remove it. Here, that's without. Then it dies out too quickly. With. And then it's tuned again to really fill the hole that it's supposed to be in and die out when the snare comes back in. But of course, the sidechain compressor on this snare will also take care of that closing down of the open hi-hat. Let's have a look at the toms that we have here, these 3 tracks. Nothing too special going on. We have a gate first to take out some bleed from the hi-hat and the snare, and then we have a bit of EQing and compression going on to get some more smack out of it. Now these toms are not playing very often in the song, actually quite rarely. That means we can put a little bit of reverb on them and really beef them up in the mix, because they only happen once in a while. We can have a look and listen at them in solo. So that sounds pretty hefty in solo, right? But if we unmute or unsolo them and have a listen. And that, seems to fit. We can also have a listen here in the start of the song where they come in. And that really gives us a nice roll into when the rest of the kit comes in. So I think that went very nice. That then leads us to the drums in the ending. I had to move those down to individual tracks, because it's like 2 songs in one. It's a complete game changer when the vocals comes in, and so I couldn't just reuse the drum sounds here. Also because of the big huge bass that comes in, which we will visit a little bit later. Let's have a little look at this. As you can see, here we have the kick in the end, and if we look at the kick at the start, just the EQ curves, they're different, right? And the same goes from snare top end, right? Very different from each other. But you will notice that my chain down here is basically the same for all of these. Then we also have a group for cymbals here that we can have a look at. We have the overheads here, and on the overheads, if we look at it, I have a compressor on here that is then tied to the snare top, because I don't want too much snare in these overheads. Then I did overdub the right cymbal that was applied with a bit of easy drummer to get it more in front of the mix, so we get this kind of sound. So there we go. That was a bit about the drums in the ending. Next up we have the basses. We have 2 of those, one for the start and one for the ending. If we look at the processing here, it might seem a little bit extreme, but in a way it's because this synthesizer has it all. It has all frequencies in it. And Alex has supplied some very, very nice tracks, so that I can then sculpt this in the mixing process to really get what we want. First, console 1, bass rider, console 1, and then I have a Nova up that will tame some more frequencies. They don't do too much, just a little bit. And then I have a limiter to tame out the rest. Bass rider doesn't catch it all. And then in the end, I actually have a bit of reverb. Even though I've sent a bit to the sends here, it wasn't quite what I wanted, but it is really nice that it has some of the same room as the drums, but then it has this to stand out. Let's have a listen. I'm going to try and mute the vintage verb. Right, let's own solo. Let's put the reverb back on. So that makes the bass here in the verse blend much better in with the drums and the room on those. The bass in the end is actually quite an extreme example of what we can do with the reverb to try and stretch the harmonics of a given signal, and then let that in the background try to embrace the whole mix and maybe also blend in with the rest of the reverbs and maybe the overheads of the drums and stuff like that to make it more as a coherent mass that really comes towards you. Here we have the bass, and we're sending a bit off to the chorus and the doubler, and we have the bass rider on, much like from the verse, EQ limiting. We can have a listen to the chorus and the doubler, how those sound with this signal. Let's try and turn them off. Chorus and a bit of doubler. But that actually wasn't quite enough for me, and the dryness of this made it, not really blend in with the rest of it. And reverb on it with a lot of low end in it would also muddy things up. So let's not do that. I used a vintage verb here. We have low cut of around 580 and high cut of around 10. Let's have a listen to this. Let's turn it off. On. Let's hear that in the mix. Right. And now it's on. Let's turn it off. Let's try and turn it back on. Listen how it blends with the overheads of the right cymbal. And back on. So, there's that. That was the bass in the end. The Taisco as a Polysynth is very nice as well. We're looking at the Polysynth from the verse here. Now again, this EQ curve might seem a little bit drastic, but in reality it's not, because we have loads of drums and other things going on in this area and we need to cut it off. And a low cut way up here would just be too much and make it too thin. On the other hand, what is there room for? Well, there's room for all these very nice harmonics in it. So let's zoom in on those and have a listen. Here it is with reverb, etc. Let's try and kill the EQ. So it gets, of course, thicker and there's some distortion going on because of the compressor here, but I'm really trying to find a nice place that it can fit in with the rest of the music here. And then we've got a bit of the gate and the room on it also as well. And that is to, of course, it's to give the artificial impression of it being in the same room as the other instruments, of course. So let's have a listen to that. then next up we have this very nice Polysynth coming up as well. And as you can see here, there is room for having low end. So I'm not cutting too much here, and then I'm boosting a lot of the highs because I really like those nice harmonics going on up there. Also worth noting is the sequencer that's coming in here. Let's have a look at that. There's some phasing going on, limiting, and a bit of EQ. Again, this is a thin sequencer thing, but I don't want to use a low cut. I still want to have something down there, so that's why this looks like this. Then I put on an auto panel here to make it move a little bit from the left and right speaker. Auto panel off. Back on. And then a bit of room, just a little bit from the gate and the room on the aux-send as well. And then it sounds like this. This then leads to the Polysynth in the end /pad and the vocals, which I've teamed up here in solo, because those two parts are very dependent upon each other. I sort of sculpted the pad in the ending here to sort of elongate the reverb and fill in the holes where the vocals is not, so as to get a coherent mass. Let's have a listen to this in solo one moment.
Tableau, you can come and breathe it the most.
Let's mute the vocals. So I actually used the Transcend Designer to kill a bit of the tails of this, because I would rather like the tails to come from the reverb, which this is then a bit of the same as on the vocals to make them blend. Let's hear that again from the top, and let's try and mute the pads. Gone. So they're just there kind of in the background, but they fill out a huge hole. Let's get them back in. So that's kind of the idea behind those. The vocals have been supplied as a small flower of tracks that we have here. Vocal lead, doubles, backing, some little ad-libs in the end. And then I have made a special source here, which we will return to later. Now, they've all been EQ'd, basically. And then I group them. And this is where the final treatment takes place. What I'd like to draw attention to here is this very nice plugin, which is an effects plugin for Reactor 5 that's called Flood Verb, and it's free. It's basically a duct reverb where you can set the threshold, so it will clamp down the reverb when there's a signal. So let's have a listen to that. Fills in, and you can see when it triggers here. Let's try and turn it off. Alright. Back on. A couple of other notes I'd like to say is that I don't use vocal line. I'm not a very big fan of that, especially on vocals that are heavily tuned. Now, pitch corrected. Alex's vocals are not that heavily pitch corrected, but even in that case, I think that vocal line makes everything sound like a robot. So I like the, occasional S that is not, completely synced here and there to give a little life. And the small imperfections that you hear here in solo are, of course, completely unrecognizable in the mix. Now let's return to the special source down here. That's a small lead-in I made. I'll listen to it. Right, let's give it a listen in solo. So what I did here is I fed all these tracks through a reverb, and then I resampled it and reversed it, and then put it in the ending as a lead up to the big, huge ending. So let's have a listen. So I think that pretty much rounds off this behind the mix video. I hope you've had fun, and I hope that you might have gleaned a couple of tricks here and there. Have a nice day.